Hello, welcome to this session. In this session, we will have Professor Raina Gibson from the University of Geneva and the Geneva Finance Research Institute, which will present the result of an exercise aimed at measuring impact for impact investing. So this is a research project that she started with Camilo Mondragon-Vélez, who will join us from the IFC, who will join us online, and Melita Leoisi, and many other people who helped them, and Raina will mention. So Raina will do this presentation, and then we'll open a discussion. So we'll have Camilo will be online, Elise Beaufils from Lombard Odier, Thierry Bux from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, Lorenzo Ciari from the EBRD, and Ernst von Kimakowitz from the Humanistic Management Network and the University of Lucerne. So Raina will give a presentation, then we'll open for discussion, and we'll open to the floor. Raina.
Yes, so it's a pleasure to have you here. I hate doing Michael Jackson's presentation, but I think I don't have the choice given the setting of this room. So I'm going to be presenting the results of a benchmarking study that we did, which is titled Towards an Impact Performance Measurement Framework for Impact Investing. And this is joint work, as Ugo just said, with Camilo, who I hope is online. He's from the IFC, and Melita Leoisi, who's formerly from the Graduate Institute. And I don't want to neglect all the people at the bottom of the page who are the researchers who worked hard on a benevolent basis to do this exercise with us. So 1 year ago, maybe some of you were in this room, we presented the first phase of this is a large project on impact measurement and impact performance measurement. And last year we asked the question, well, what is the state of the art on ESG quality reporting and the quality reporting of impact investors? And so we benchmarked 30 large firms on their ESG disclosure, and we found that mostly they were doing poorly on double materiality and they were doing poorly on transparency. Then we benchmarked 30 impact investors based on their stated strategic objectives, whether they were using an impact framework measurement process, and so forth. And what we found were two interesting issues. First of all, I'm just zooming now on the impact investors. We found first that very few of them had actually an impact measurement framework in place. And when it comes to reporting the results of their impact in terms of impact, they only assess the direct and not the indirect effects of what they were doing with their investments. So this phase 2 is an ambitious phase. It's about impact measurement and impact performance measurement. So what we would like is to present to you in a benchmark study the impact metrics that we think are rigorous enough to move on from impact reporting to impact performance assessment. And why do we think this is an important topic? Well, first of all, if you see the impact market, impact investors market, it's been growing from 2015 of roughly 15 billion, quite negligible, to over 1 trillion in 2021. Sorry, I need to put the microphone closer. So quite an exponential rise in the assets under management in this field. So now if you look at what is out there in terms of metrics, there's no universally agreed metrics to capture impact for performance assessment and performance comparison. The other thing that we found, and that I will show you in a minute, is that there is a dichotomy between financial metrics such as return on equity, return on assets, many metrics about performance measurement on the financial perspective, very few metrics that really capture impact, and that's what you want to do. And ultimately, the goal of this presentation and of this study is to be able to compare projects among themselves and to compare investors among themselves. That's about performance measurement in more general terms. Okay, so what are the main research questions? There's been 4 research questions. The first one is zooming in on what practitioners are actually doing when it comes to impact metrics. How do they select them, and what criteria do they use? I think one of the novelty of the study that we have done is that it's a joint collaboration between practitioners and academics. So Camilo representing very well the practitioner space. I think I quite represent the academic space, and I apologize for that. And so we could also look at what the literature in academia is doing in order to assess performance in terms of impact. And we will see that quite surprisingly, there is a big mismatch between what the practitioners are doing and what academia is doing. So then we asked the question, well, can we come up with a relevant set of criteria that allow us to validate the metrics? And we will propose these criteria, and I'm going to discuss them with you. And finally, we do a benchmarking exercise for a given pilot sector, an economic sector, in order to show you how we can compare performance across peers and across investment projects. So the methodology in a nutshell, first of all, which sector are we going to choose? Well, that was a debate. There's many interesting sectors. We did 3 types of weighting. We had 60 large impact investors. On the left side of the graph, we just counted how many times they mentioned projects in agriculture, credit finance, and so forth. In the second middle graph, what we did was a bit more sophisticated. The counting was weighted by the quartile in terms of assets under management to which these investors belong. So if there's large investors, they have more weight than small investors. And in the third panel on the right side, the graph shows basically for 25 investors, we had the exact dollar allocations in every sector. And the surprising thing, this is not working very well, but you can see that in all 3 weighting schemes, credit finance appears as the dominant sectors in which these impact investors are actually investing. Now, secondly, we defined a set of criteria, and I would like everybody to challenge these criteria because this is our own brainstorming exercise. And these are the criteria that allow us to say, well, a metric is good or is not rigorous enough for impact performance measurement. And then what we did is we looked at the academic literature. We came up with 162 metrics and KPIs. We narrowed it down to actually 45 that were relevant for credit finance. We did the same exercise for the practitioners' impact metrics. We started with 129 of them. We narrowed it down to 39 of these impact metrics for the practitioners. Now, what are the criteria? This is perhaps the most important piece, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit lengthy, but this is the most important piece to judge the validity or the robustness of our results. So 5 criteria. The first one that they had to pass was measurability. As an academic, I like to quantify things, and these metrics have to allow us quantification, and this methodology that is used to define them has to be clearly defined and reproducible. The second criteria, and probably those of you who work in the impact investing space are familiar with that, is quality of the data, feasibility. So the data has to be of good quality and easily accessible. This is more easily said than done, generally. The third criteria is intentionality. So what is intentionality? Intentionality means that the metric states the outcome as related to the core purpose of the investment, and in addition, ideally, it should capture significant externalities related to the investment. The last 2 criteria you will see are the most difficult ones. incrementality. What does it mean? It means that the metric should be able to only assess the value added or the impact generated by the investment. That means you have to discount the organic growth. And finally, the last criteria, which of course we like for performance measurement, is comparability. So comparability, what does it mean? First of all, it has to be measurable. That's obvious. It has to satisfy criteria number one. And secondly, it has to be normalized so that I can know exactly per dollar invested what is the impact that was generated, so that you can allow for comparison across projects and across investors with different sizes in terms of assets under management. So just in terms of the results, the black bars tell you how many metrics we started with in the academic space and in the practitioner space. The red bars tell you how many metrics from the academic literature don't match with those from the policy literature and vice versa. And if you go all the way to the right, these are the metrics that exactly match. How many of them? Only 5. So it means academics and practitioners are only harmonized with respect to 5 metrics. On most of the other ones, they use different procedure to calculate value added in terms of metrics. So that's not a bad result in some sense, because you could think that the academic metrics could be complementary with the practitioners, and most groups, the two groups, can learn from each other, right? So it's not such a bad result we thought in the end. So the 2 next slides are really the key results from our benchmarking study. So on the left side, you have the practitioners' metrics, the 39 of them, and on the right side, you have the academic metrics, and we rank them against each of our 5 criteria. And as you can see, for the first 3 criteria, they do reasonably well, actually quite good. So basically, just to give a few numbers, on measurability, 84% for the practitioners one, even higher number, 97 for the academic ones. Usually academics like quantifiable metrics. If you take intentionality, it's a little bit weaker, 76%, 76.9 for the practitioners and 80% for the academic ones. Now, where the problem starts is when you look at the last 2 criteria. Sorry. So when you look, how much time do I have?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, I'll manage. So if you look at the last 2 criteria, in terms of comparability, 15% of the practitioners based allow for comparison. That's quite low. For those that are from the academic space, 56%. That's slightly better, and that's encouraging. But when it comes to incrementality, that means discounting for the organic growth, 2% of the metrics pass the bar, so hardly any metrics at all. Now, we did an exercise, and that's thanks to Camilo. We thought, what are the 3 first metrics? What are they doing? When you have measurability, when you have feasibility, so data quality, and when you have intentionality, basically those that fill the bar, that pass the bar of those 3 criteria, they will be useful for impact reporting. And as you can see, the picture looks quite good in both spaces. 58%, I need some stronger glasses, from the practitioner side, and about 71% for the academic side. So roughly 70% on the academic side allow you to do impact reporting. Now, our aspirational goal is to move from just reporting to impact performance comparison and analysis. Now, there you need to satisfy all 5 criteria. And if you look at the picture, and we were quite surprised, maybe somebody will have to say something about it, no metric, 0, fulfilled all 5 criteria that allow us to actually do performance analysis on the impact space. So maybe we set the bar too high. I'll discuss this in a minute. But just to summarize the main findings, what we found is that, first of all, there's many financial metrics out there. There's a very limited number of what we would call rigorous impact metrics that allow for performance measurement. There is a discrepancy between what the academics are doing and what practitioners are doing, and I think there would be a benefit to do more exercises like the one we did to foster synergy. We can learn from each other. And now more than half of these metrics, this is the good news, pass the bar when it comes to impact reporting, and that's already what we saw a bit last year, but only 0, the empty set, mathematically speaking, pass the bar of all the 5 criteria which are necessary to allow you to do performance analysis. So what we would recommend is that professionals start using metrics that foster incrementality and comparability. Now, how do we do that? Basically by using metrics that discount the organic growth and using metrics that allow for normalization. And you're going to tell me, maybe as an academic, I'm too theoretic and these metrics do not exist. Well, I'm going to show you they exist. You can start with existing metrics, you can transform them, and you can make them pass the bar of all the 5 criteria. And this is exactly what we propose here, a few examples. So the first one that I propose is the trended change in the share of small, medium enterprises loans to total loans. The trended means you remove the average growth, so you allow to capture just the investment-driven growth in terms of SME loans. The second one, the trended change in the share of women-led businesses loans to total SME loans. Again, the fact that you detrend it, again, means that you account for incrementality. The third one is even easier, jobs created, but be careful, jobs created by the investment program per total dollars of investment. So if you allow me, Ugo, a last concluding slide. So where are we standing at this point? Well, we would advocate to move towards a selection of metrics, doesn't need to be very big, that moves us from impact reporting to impact performance measurement. And somebody yesterday, I think it's Mr. Brooks, said, so what? And it's precisely this question, so what? We want to do analysis with these metrics. And to do analysis, we think that these 5 criteria have to be fulfilled. So what are the next steps? The next steps is we would like to enlarge the library of relevant metrics, those that pass the bar of all the 5 criteria. We would like to do the same benchmarking study for other economic sectors. We could team up with other people if they're interested, basically for the agriculture business, for the energy business, for the manufacturing business, and so forth, and then create a library of these KPIs and these metrics, and that's a public good. For us, it's not a commercial exercise, it's a public good that everybody would use and could ideally use to make impact performance measurements. So I thank you very much. I hope I didn't take too much of a time. And
you were perfect, Raina. You know, I used to work in Latin America, and 20 minutes always became 1 hour. In Switzerland, 20 minutes are 20 minutes. So we have a group of panelists which represent different views. So we'll talk with Camilo in a few seconds. So Camilo is a principal economist at IFC, and I think he's here in 2 hats. 1 hat as a co-author of Raina, and 1 hat as a person on the trenches. So I will ask him a question about the trenches more than the report. And then we have Lorenzo, who also works in a multilateral development financial institution. Thierry, who is in a bilateral development financial institution. Elise, who is in the private sector, and Ernest will give a more researcher point of view. So I will ask them questions. I will ask them to stay below 5 minutes in their answers so that we can open for discussion. We'll have some time for discussion at the end. But Camilo, are you online? Hello, Camilo. I think it's 4 in the morning for you. Thanks for waking up so early. So Camilo, Raina mentioned a little bit about the discussion between academic and practitioner. There is another level of discussion, which is the discussion between practitioner in development financial institution like you and organization like the Global Impact Investment Network. How can you see harmonization between different players, and what do you think needs to be done more to increase harmonization from the point of view where you're sitting at the IFC?
Thank you very much, Hugo, and I wish I could be there with all these great colleagues discussing in person. Fortunately, I'm in the UK, so it's not 4 a.m. for me, although I'm still jet lagged. So look, that's precisely the motivation. One of the motivations for me to be part of this study was what I have been observing as a practitioner. In the past 10 years, I think there's been a lot of effort by organizations like the Global Impact Investing Network, by the group of development finance institutions under the Harmonized Indicators for Private Sector Operations, HIPSO, to try to harmonize and come up with metrics that we can commonly use. However, the focus of this, let's say, first decade of those efforts has been on reporting, on metrics that we collect and can report and can follow the same definitions. And I think that's a great initial step towards really bringing to the industry what it needs to be able to scale up, which is to be able to compare performance. Right now, I was putting it in terms of a comparison with the financial metrics, which is the right one. If we think impact investors have this double bottom line of impact performance as well as financial performance. And to balance these two aspects, it would be ideal to be able to compare the impact performance, which is what brought us to do this kind of study and try to have some systematic way of doing this. In recent meetings in HIPSO that actually Lorenzo hosted earlier this year, we had that discussion and we said, well, we have all these metrics, how do we move forward? And fortunately, I was already part of this study and already announced to my colleagues that something is coming, and that's why we want everyone to challenge the criteria. We think this should be a systematic approach to be able to get to those metrics, and that's where we are. So hopefully the industry hears this message. We think it's important. It's important to get to that point where we can compare performance, so that we can attract more investors that understand better what is it that their money is doing in addition to generating financial returns. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Camilo. Let me now go to Elise Beaufils. Elise is the Deputy Head of Sustainability Research at Lombard Odier. And what I wanted to ask Elise is, what is the role of rigorous research aimed at measuring impact, the type of research that Raina and Camilo and Melita are doing in mobilizing resources to reach the SDG, and more in general, what's the role of credit markets or conventional credit markets in reaching the SDGs?
Yes, thanks, Hugo. So quite a lot of things in this question, so I'm going to tackle a few of them. And I think in the study that Rania and Camilo put together, it's really putting the focus on the comparability of the metrics. And as a practitioner and as an asset manager who has quite a large team of researchers dedicated to sustainability, this is really where we are spending a lot of our time. If I give you kind of a fictional example of a fund of funds of private equity, if you look into the impact report of each of the underlying private equity funds, you'll see that they are all reporting very different sets of impact metrics. And very few of them are actually giving us the methodology of how they end up with the actual number that they're reporting. So a lot of the work that we do and that we have to do because these metrics are not comparable is actually to define our own framework so that we can compare across the board and we can aggregate at portfolio level. And I can give you a very simple example on climate change, which is where I think most metrics are quite advanced today. It's what we call avoided emissions. And I'm sure most of you have heard about these metrics before. You have some companies that are going to report avoided emissions of solar panels installation compared to a world where electricity is solely produced using coal power plants. You have some other companies that are going to report avoided emissions using a baseline scenario that is coming from the IEA, for instance. And you have others that are going to use a baseline that is their own custom framework. And so in the end, you've got one single metric, called avoided emission, but with different methodology, you get to completely different results. And this is why we have a very strong need for this comparability, for this transparency, where we agree all on the framework, or at least we disclose what are the assumptions that we're using to generate the impact metric. Maybe another element to your question, Hugo, if I still have some time. You've mentioned, the number of metrics that exist out there. I think you've selected a bit less than 50 metrics to focus on credit finance. Something we do see a lot is practitioners reporting very niche metrics, I would say. Impact metrics that are extremely relevant, but for just one type of investment in one specific project. And so if you start aggregating across the board, there's not much you can do. So I think sometimes, and maybe that's something that could be included or looked into as part of this study, it's the need to be precise enough to capture the additionality and the impact done by the investment, but not try to be too specific so that in the end we can have a subset of generalist metric we can use for climate, biodiversity, and social as well.
Thank you very much, Elise. Let me now go to Thierry, who is a senior policy advisor in the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. And I'm going to ask Thierry and then Lorenzo a similar question. But from the point of view of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, which is an important bilateral player in this space, how important is impact measurement and performance when you think about what to do and how to allocate resources?
Thanks, Hugo. 5 minutes, right?
Everybody behaved very well. Below the 5 minutes.
No, it's going to be tight indeed. So the role of SDC as a donor agency is really to play an active role as a provider of catalytic finance, mostly to de-risk transactions, especially in the context of blended structures. So we are a donor, but we play an active role, for instance, investing in first loss type of tranches with a view really to mobilize additional investments. So I would say that from an economic perspective, this role is underpinned by two fundamental conditions. The first one is subsidiarity. When you take a first loss, this is given. But the second one, which is also linked to the topic of the research, is the size of the positive externality which is associated with the investment. And it should be large enough to justify a role, which is the use of taxpayers' money. And this is where I would say that impact is really at the core of our own considerations, because at the end of the day, you want to know what you're buying in terms of impact, hence the importance of sound impact measurement and management. And this is where I think the plot is thickening, because what we've been talking about so far is not so much about impact in terms of metrics, but about outputs and activities, the number of loans provided, the number of clients, the volume of additional financing provided to SMEs. But those metrics are instrumental in achieving something else related to the SDGs, for instance, in terms of poverty reduction or reduction in inequalities. So the name of the game is to be in a position to select those metrics which can be reasonably good proxies associated with a positive long-term impact. But the long-term impact is not something that you can easily measure. There's usually a huge time lag. So you can only guess and hope for the best in terms of selecting the right metrics. So that's the number one challenge. And in this context, what we have observed is that very often less is more. A lot of investors out there, a lot of DFIs are actually requested to collect an increasing amount of data. Very often, as is mentioned, very niche metrics which cannot be aggregated, but sometimes you get lost in the quantity of this data and you don't know exactly what to do with this data. Hence, a little bit the sort of so what question. So, in fact, we are stuck between two different trends, a trend towards streamlining and harmonizing, getting to maybe less but more relevant metrics. And the other trend, especially fostered by shareholders of DFIs, but also investors, is also a quest for even more information or more granular information. And this is not so easy to reconcile. The second issue, which is also a challenge, is that very often, not everything is quantifiable. At the end of the day, you're also interested in the quality of the impact. And I think the best illustration, which is also kind of a minefield of ambiguity, is jobs. Basically, jobs are a very complicated metrics because it depends also on the type of job contracts. Are we talking about seasonal workers? Are we talking about full-time employees? And so on and so forth. Permanent workers versus temporary workers hired in the context of construction projects. This is, in other words, a job is not necessarily equal everywhere. And in terms of working conditions, you want to make sure that you're talking about decent jobs aligned with SDG 8. So a lot of qualitative elements which cannot be captured alone by a single quantitative metric. And the last thing is going back to this so what question. Again, counting the number of loans, the number of new clients, the volume of new financing to enterprises, don't tell you exactly what happens afterwards in terms of in which way the lives of enterprises, of employees, of suppliers, and customers is improving in a way that meets the SDGs. And this is not something that you can actually so much collect in terms of data or measure, but you're entering the field of ex post type of evaluation so as to find, I would say, a good match between the input in the discussion, the outputs of your contribution, and the long-term impact. So the sobering fact is that we tend to know relatively little about long-term impact. And it's true that very often we can get fooled by the fact that we get impact reports, which are not really associated with the impact. So my quest is really to try to streamline as much as possible and indeed to look at the attribution, which is the incrementality dimension, and the comparability, notwithstanding the fact that we're still talking about the outputs and the impacts belong to another category of estimates.
Thank you, Thierry. So if I could summarize what you said, it's complicated, right? And that's why you need smart people like Rania, and we are all here to think about it. So let me move to Lorenzo, who is the Director of Impact at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So can you tell us a little bit how you try to address this complicated problem within the bank? How you go about trying to implement impact measurement?
Yes, and thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm sure Camillo has listened very carefully to what you had to say about jobs, because he's working very hard on this, especially on job quality. And you actually said a lot of the things I wanted to say. Let me tell you how we go about impact measurement at the BRD very briefly, and the issues we have with reporting, which is linked to that. So the EBRD's mandate is to promote transition towards well-functioning market economies. And over time, we came to define a well-functioning market economies through 6 qualities or attributes. An economy that is green, inclusive, integrated, resilient, well-governed, and competitive. And we have then developed a theory of change across sectors mapped onto these 6 qualities. And so for each project, we look at which of the quality we contribute to. So for example, if you're thinking that a project contributes to increase competitiveness in a given sector, we have impact objectives for competitiveness, for example, increasing competition, innovation, and then we have a set of questions that we ask our industry experts and operation leaders to fill in to come up with a score, an ex ante score, and with indicators that will monitor the success of the project. So we have an ex ante score, a portfolio score, and these are part of the institutional scorecard of the bank. So, taken very seriously by the EBRD. And indicators are chosen from a compendium, which is very large. Now, when it comes to reporting, this is where we have a challenge. As was noticed before, we are one of the few institutions, I think in good company, that doesn't have yet a comprehensive impact report, right? And we're working on that. We hope to release one in 2024, 2025, but the issues are very much related to what we are discussing today. First of all, the impact measurement system at EBRD has been developed as an internal management tool. So it is a tool for our management and our board to decide where to allocate the funds, which sectors, which projects to prioritize. It was not conceived as a tool to report to our stakeholders the impact that we are achieving. And so when we move to that stage, we face a lot of challenges. First of all, the fragmentation of indicators. We have a very tailored approach, depending on the client, depending on the sector, depending on the country, depending on this criteria we're discussing, the feasibility, for example. It depends on the sectors, the context, the client, and so on. But this fragmentation, this tailor-made approach has led to very difficult issue to address, which is that of aggregation. And this is why we are changing our indicators to have a system that is more conducive to aggregation, quantification, and reporting. And of course, you have issues with data systems, data governance, all the things that you need to address when you are about to report. You need to be prepared to be audited for the quality of the data that you have. But there's an additional layer of complication here, which I wanted to close on, which is, I think, also related to the discussion we're having today, is what impact means for an institution like EBRD. For us, the key source of impact is what we call systemic change, is what IFC would call market creation, is what BII would call catalytic effects. So it's essentially impact that goes beyond the project boundaries. It's not, how many jobs we create. It's not how many people we reach, but it's how we catalyze through, different channels, demonstration effects, innovations, competition, capacity building, how we contribute to develop markets. And when it comes to this type of notions, like project outside the project, the boundaries of the investment, when it comes to behavioral change, for example, when it comes to change in institutions, the quantification becomes incredibly difficult. And we are trying to crack on this issue because we want to be able to report comprehensively on the impact that we achieve as an institution. We just don't want to end up counting beans because this is not the business in which we are in. We are in the long-term impact, market transformation, which is very important for us. And we know that not everything that is relevant is measurable, right? And vice versa, not everything that is measurable is relevant, right? But when it comes to building credible reporting on these other aspects, it's very difficult. So I don't have an answer yet, but we're working very hard with colleagues also in other institutions to be able to address this.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. So yeah, it's a complicated thing, and that's why we are here, right? So before I open to the floor, I want to ask one more question to Ernst. So Ernst is the co-founder of the Humanistic Management Network and is a senior research fellow at the University of Lucerne. So I would like to put you your researcher hat and tell us what you think about this piece of research that was presented by Raina, and specifically if you found something surprising or not. So what are your reaction to this research? Quickly, then we'll open the floor. Thank
Thank you. Surprising or not, I guess a bit of both is always a good answer with this question. Surprised definitely by the fact that you couldn't find a single case where all metrics were covered, where all criteria were covered, right? Because if you look at the criteria, they're all plausible, they make a lot of sense, and I'm sure they're agreeable to most of the people you were looking at, how they are reporting and how they're doing their impact measurement. So that definitely was a surprise. The not so surprising element, I think, is the part of this research underlining the necessity to have a unified metric, to look at how we can collect and create more comparability. And I think this is connected to the bigger question of why are we doing impact measurement in the first place. And it is not so surprising what Elisa said, that we have this very fragmented landscape where partly metrics are only applicable to one single investment. And I think this is not so much a surprise if we're in the mindset or in the framing where impact measurement is done in order to satisfy investors' requests for having some impact data. But if we're moving beyond that and saying the actual reason, the real why of impact measurement is to be able to learn from existing investments in order to enhance and create a bigger, a better impact in future investments, then all that has been done in the study and that you're working on becomes phenomenally relevant, because then we need comparability. Then we need to know what can be measured and what cannot be measured. And then we need to know in a effective and efficient manner how we can measure impact and be transparent and honest about what it does and what it doesn't do. So my overall non-surprising summary would be, we really need to reflect on why we're doing impact measurement, and doing it in order to satisfy investors with all the legitimacy and need to do that is of limited value if we don't also look at how can we use impact measurement to inform better decisions in future.
Thank you very much, Ernest. I was looking at the room. The room is full. There are actually people standing, so that actually shows that people really care about these issues. We have a little bit more than 15 minutes, so we're doing well on time. I have more questions, but before asking my questions, I would like to see if there are questions from the floor. Maybe we collect 3 questions and 2 instructions. I see 1, 2, 3. 2 instructions, short question. If you are directed to a specific speaker, tell to whom they are directed, and say who you are. So the first one is there.
Real estate industry a bit more sustainable. It's a journey. Thank you for explanation about the method. My question is about externality, but negative externality. I think we talked a bit about positive externality, but if I'm not wrong, not about negative externality. My question is, did you consider something about this topic? And I was expecting maybe a definition of impact in introduction. I'm sure you have one. So yes, what we can say about this, I give 2 examples. Water consumption in new agriculture technical, or metal extraction in electrical car industry, for example. So can you elaborate a bit about these questions? Okay. Thank you.
There was another question. So I have 4. So one is there. Here, in the middle. So go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Johan Lamadant from Arcadis. I had a question about this incrementality criterion. And in fact, I have to admit, I don't understand it very well. When you relate it to a metric, I think you need to relate it to a process, a monitoring process. When you have a baseline and you monitor over time, then you can measure the incrementality. And you can do that with whatever metric. If it's a metric on water quality or a metric on jobs created and so on, but the incrementality is something that is created over time due to your investment. That's my understanding of incrementality. So I think it's a little bit too academic to try to link the criterion of incrementality to the metric itself. Thank you.
Okay. And the lady with the white jacket, and then I get, sorry, I was pointing at somebody and somebody else asked, so I'm confused.
Thank you. My name is Raphael from UNEP, the Land Use Finance Unit. I think your question, Ernst, is really central. You know, what are we reporting performance for? And I think that, I mean, from my perspective, some elements of answer would be to simply accelerate public and private financial flows into net zero and nature positive. I think this is really what we're all aiming for. So the question is, what does it take for DFIs and multilaterals to agree on a top 5 to 10 KPIs that would report positive outcome or positive impacts of your investments, so that we have this comparability, we have this measurability, we have this transparency across all development finance into where it matters the most. Thank you.
Okay, so I saw there are 2 more questions. We go with a quick round of answer to this. We start with Raina, and then I think there are questions which are more directed to Camilo and Lorenzo. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Raina.
so if I understood you in the back, there was one question about negative externalities, and when we sort of tried to apply our third criteria, which was intentionality, which is about the core purpose, and of course, positive externalities and negative externalities. We could not find metrics, neither in the academic literature nor in the practitioners' frameworks, that actually properly address this important issue, and that's why in terms of recommendation, I didn't spend too much time because I didn't have time. This is one of the things we advocate as well, is to look at positive externalities, because that's not clear that they're mentioned either, but also, of course, to tackle negative externalities. But unfortunately, this is an empty set as well in the subsample that we investigated, of metrics that we investigated for the credit finance sector. Now, there was a second question on incrementality. I think we do agree, you and I. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough in explaining that concept. I think when we had the students helping us do the benchmarking exercise, this is the criteria that everybody stumbled upon. What we mean is that generally when we have the reported metrics, we cannot distinguish the organic growth, let's say in loans, in jobs creation, I'm not even talking about the quality of the jobs, from what is added and contributed by this additional investment. And that's what we would like to capture, of course, is that added financial investment boosting the organic growth, and is it boosting it in the right direction? And then we can talk about the qualitative issues that some of my colleagues mentioned, and we're not disregarding them. We're just saying, first of all, let's look at the measurable, and then perhaps dissecate the qualitative aspects. So I think the last 2 questions were more addressed to the DFI, so I'll let either Thierry or Lorenzo.
Camilo, if you want to step in.
Yes.
Camilo, maybe you should start.
You always give me the hard job, Lorenzo.
Yes.
Exactly.
So look, on the incrementality, I fully agree that this is something that you measure when you monitor. What we are trying to capture here is your ex-ante expectation of what you're going to then supervise, because with that expectation is you're kind of setting the goal in a way of what you want to achieve with the investment. That's why we try to estimate it beforehand, and that's the usual practice of setting targets. And on the DFIs, when I intervened the first time, I was telling everyone the story. It has taken a lot of effort, more than 10 years of discussions among the DFIs to agree on a set of metrics that are under the HIPSO initiative. On that are mainly on reporting. They are mainly metrics that are collected and are used for reporting. So what it will take, I think it will take, let's say, more work. I think, as I mentioned, that when we met in London last spring, this started arising. Now we have too many metrics in that set. And the question was posed in what are the core metrics? We need something to be able to decide what are the core metrics of all these heaps of set. And hopefully what we expect is that research like this one and maybe other efforts that will come point in that direction. So the DFIs are having this conversation. Not sure how much time will it take because it took us 10 years to get to the reporting metrics, and these are much harder, as several of the colleagues in the panel have rightly indicated, of different aspects of this that are not easy to solve. Lorenzo?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. We touched upon some of the issues and challenges we have when it comes to agreeing on a common set of metrics, and the discussion around jobs is quite exemplary in this respect. Nonetheless, I think the work that, for example, we've done in the context of HIPSO, developing so many metrics on which we agree, right? We may use them more or less depending on the nature of the organizations, but we do have a critical set of metrics, and we could, move to the next phase of, aggregate reporting, right? And agreeing on a common set of metrics that all DFIs should report on. This is not, however, just a matter for development impact specialists or impact departments, right? There is also there should be the willingness at the higher levels to decide that we, join forces and collectively report on certain metrics. So I think technically we should be able to do it, maybe without touching on issues that are still under discussion, like jobs quality and so on, and maybe still preserving the, peculiarity or identity of the different institutions. But I think technically we should be able to do that, right? It just may be more a matter of, willingness at the higher levels to do so. But I think also with all this discussion about MDB reforms and the new leadership at the bank, there is this sense that we need to go into that direction. So I'm quite optimistic, I would say.
Okay, we have 7 minutes. Thierry, you want to add something for 1 minute, or we have still 2 questions?
Just one very small, compliment on why is it complicated for DFIs to agree on a set of limited indicators. As was mentioned, there's been, there have been some harmonization efforts, and they are still ongoing, and this is a long battle. This being said, there's an additional factor which is complicated things, which is basically the political imperative of some shareholders to have the data reported in a certain way. So you can still use the same type of indicators, but in your own reporting, you produce your own little version of things. If you take jobs, for instance, you take one report, and basically it's the job numbers created which is reported. In another report, this is on a pro rata basis, which probably makes more sense. In another report, this is the average number of jobs created over the last 4 years, and so on and so forth. So you may have the same kind of underlying metrics, but you may not achieve the comparability precisely because of reporting differences which are linked to shareholders' instructions.
Okay, that's an important point. So there was when you're a kid, your mother tells you not to point, but it's hard to not to point here. So there was a question here and another one back there. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jack Ralston, and I am a student at the Graduate Institute of Geneva, and I recently interned at a blended finance fund over the summer, and one of the things that the blended finance fund did was have an external monitoring, reporting, and verification organization working with them, nonprofit. And given Dr. Ciari's note that impact management systems have been developed historically as internal management systems, I'm wondering, in terms of seeking towards the standardization and the comparability of these different metrics, is there a future in externalizing some of the monitoring, reporting, and verification methodologies, working with outside organizations? Is there a feasibility for that? What are the risks, implications, and also opportunities for that? Thank you.
There was also one back there, so quickly.
Thanks very much. I wonder if I could maybe just make one comment and one question. Firstly, my name's John Duncan. I work at Rail Bank here in Geneva, have a background in monitoring and evaluation. The first comment is I wonder if we need to be cautious about the use of the word impact. I've heard it mentioned twice by people on the stage, and I say this because the word impact is appropriated from the development finance world, and it has specific meaning. It's a meaning that's related to causality. I do this, therefore that happens. That's near impossible to measure, as we've heard from development finance institutes who've done this for decades. So I wonder if we don't save ourselves a whole lot of trouble and step back a little bit more and frame the question more appropriately. So that's the comment. I guess the second, the question is, have you thought about whether there's some value in thinking about context-weighted accounting? So a job created in a society with a high amount of unemployment versus a job created in a society with, and these kinds of context impacts are visible. And so I'm just wondering if there's not a smarter way to do it. Thank you.
Got it. So we have 3 minutes. Who wants to take? Who wants to take these questions?
So there was a question from a student, and I think absolutely, at least in terms of validating the methodologies. This is what I think different institutions already do it, like they externalize the validation of the methodologies, and this is what we are also considering at the moment because of the challenges I discussed. And when it comes to the reporting and verifying the data and so on, of course there's some issues there in terms of how sensitive this data is and so on. But I think that the development of external validation and I think it's a good thing in my view, precisely to give credibility to the data we have. And there was a question on of course we are all very aware about the causality issues, and our toolkit is not just about monitoring certain data. We all do impact evaluations, so we try to go as much as we can when we can into the notion of causality and really understanding impact from that perspective. And indeed, all our impact measures, definitely at EBRD, for sure at IFC, they are context specific, maybe not the indicator itself, but when it comes to assess the value of the proposed interventions, the impact score that we provide to our project is usually a combination of the magnitude of the effect, but also of the magnitude of the challenge we are addressing. So we know that creating jobs in different contexts is different, and that's how we value it differently through our performance systems.
Camillo, you want to add something on this context-specific issue?
Yeah, sure, but it's almost a repetition of what Lorenzo said. One of the innovations that we brought when we redesigned the system, the impact measurement system in IFC, was to bring the concept of a gap, of a development gap, which is precisely to say, if you create, for example, jobs in two different contexts, you're going to, let's say, give more credit to those that are created in a higher unemployment, informality type of context than in the other. So that's there, and several institutions have adopted a similar approach. And as Lorenzo said, others just use this as a contextual kind of assessment when they are doing it. If they don't do it formally in IFC, we have indicators for that, benchmarks, etc. On the M&E, just wanted to point out that the DFIs, many of them have independent evaluation groups that are looking also at our investments. And they have their own kind of meetings where they share methodologies, etc. And as Lorenzo indicated as well, all of this is being validated and externalized. So that's another avenue to have these discussions. Definitely, these are colleagues that are looking at this from that angle of the ex post information that comes out of the investments.
Thanks, Camillo. So there were no specific questions addressed to Elise and Ernest, and we're kind of out of time, but if you want to take 1 minute, we'll still 1 minute to organize it if you want to add something, Elise or Ernest.
So maybe to the point around auditing the data and getting an external verification. So obviously, I think everyone here would say in an ideal world, we would welcome that. We'd love to have someone be able to verify extra-financial information the same way that financial information and data points are verified. But unfortunately, and not willing to sound too pessimistic. I think it's not saving us from having the discussion around what is the standard, how do we measure impact, what are the criteria, for instance, that Hania highlighted that we need to use. Because else, what's going to happen? We're going to have one audit having its own set of criteria, validating some metrics, another audit company having a different set of criteria, and we have the whole same discussion, except that we are not owning the discussion. It is yet externalized to any other stakeholders on the market. So yes, absolutely, at some point, like for ESG data, we'd love to have an audit being put in place, but we do need to discuss what makes a good and true impact metric. And to the second question, it goes again with the definition of what is impact and where does it apply across the board in the finance industry.
Ernest,
Let me just
quickly.
Comment in one sentence on the last comment. I think, yes, terminology is key, right? We need to know what we're talking about when we're saying impact. And there may be situations where knowing the outcomes is perfectly fine. We don't need to go the next step to actually try to assess impact when having a solid view on what the outcomes are is sufficient. And so, yes, let's be clear on terminology and let's be aware of maybe a level of inflationary risk when we're looking at the term of impact, because it is such an attractive term that it may be used sometimes in ways that is not terminologically correct. But overall, if you can measure it, there will be a benefit from it. But sometimes measuring or knowing the outcomes will be sufficient, and then maybe that's good enough then.
Thank you very much. So let me thank Raina, Camillo, and Melita for leading their team for leading this effort, the panelists for the discussion, and all the team at the Center for Finance and Development, Patricia Arnold, and everybody else for actually working behind the scene towards this successful event. So thank you very much.